Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of We're Watching Star Trek, the original series. Today we're going to cover Season 1, Episode 5, The Enemy Within. Original air date is October 6, 1966. I am Brandon, and I'm here again with Dan.
How's it going?
And Paul's actually not with us today. He's got some technical issues he has to get worked out, so hopefully he can come back and join us next week. This episode opens up with a shot of the Enterprise orbiting a planet, which is pretty much what happens every episode, I'm realizing. The crew of the Enterprise is on a specimen gathering mission on another desert-looking planet called Alpha 177, and Sulu is holding what's supposed to be, I guess, like some weird furry horned like unicorn creature, but it's pretty obviously just like a dog in a suit.
Perfect role for a dog.
Yeah. I don't know what I expected when we were going to get our first like non-human creature, but just like it's very obviously a dog, and it's like impossible to get past that. And I was wondering, like, do you think that the people in like the 60s saw that and they were like, oh my God, look at that alien? Or were they just like, that's a dog?
I would like to think like, wow, that's mind-blowing. They're able to dress a dog up.
Yeah.
And it's just going to, basically stay still the whole time.
Yeah, that was a very well-behaved dog throughout the entire episode, too. Like, that's what I thought was crazy. So, Sulu is shaking a little bit, and he mentions to Captain Kirk that the temperature is starting to drop, and Kirk says that at night, that temperature of that planet gets down to 120 below zero, and Sulu is just like, oh, that's nippy, which I mean, just a little bit.
Which makes me wonder how the dog hybrid thing, whatever it is able to survive that extreme, cold every night.
Oh my God, I didn't even think of that. Yeah, like it's furry, but it's got that hair, but it's not like...
You wouldn't think it would keep you warm.
You think they like hibernate, or not hibernate, but like they dig it in the ground and have like underground, like layers or whatever?
I mean, you would have to. You would want to get out of the cold somehow.
Yeah, I didn't even think of that. Huh. They didn't bother to explain it. Like they could have said something, huh?
Like, oh, this fur is so good, it'll keep you warm when it's, what do you say, negative 160?
Negative 120 is what
120. They get to. I couldn't imagine how cold that is.
Yeah. So they hear some rocks fall, and they hear a guy yell, and they go and rush to investigate, and they find geological technician Fisher, and he fell off a little embankment and injured his hand, and Kirk tells him to go back to the sick bay. So on the Enterprise, Scotty beams Fisher up, and as he's beaming up, they get like a little alarm starts to go off, and Scotty looks a little concerned. And then they get a shot of the transporter, and Fisher just looks like he's like stuck mid-transport, like he's just kind of half there, half not. So on the planet, is it like the same thing on the planet, do you think? Like everybody just sees him kind of half beamed?
Well, he walked away, so you never see him around people getting beamed up.
Right, but like... On the planet, though, like this Fisher guy, as he's kind of stuck in the transport process, he's kind of half in the ship, but is he also like half on the planet at that point? Like, is he kind of halfway in two places at once?
I don't know.
So Scotty starts making some adjustments to the transporter to try to fix it. And Fisher, he makes it in all the way, and he steps off the transporter, and I immediately thought, like, what happened to the decontamination process? Like, did they not learn their lesson from the virus that just took over their whole ship not too long ago?
I was kind of thinking the same thing on that.
Yeah, like they're just down there on a planet, messing around with like weird animals and stuff, and they just completely threw out everything that recently happened to them, and like, oh, that's fine, we can bring up whatever contamination there is.
Well, you'd also think the sterilization would help with the wound anyway.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like, does it sterilize, or does it just decontaminate? Well, I guess if there's germs like in wounds, then those would be a contamination, right? Like a foreign substance or something.
That would also beg the question: how would it know which one's the target?
Yeah, you wouldn't want it going after like the good stuff in your body. So Scotty and another technician approach Fisher, and they give him like a little scan, and he's talking about he fell off an embankment into some kind of yellow ore. And Scotty finishes up the scan and says that the ore is magnetic, and tells Fisher to go decontaminate his uniform. And so Fisher leaves. Scotty says that the transporter acted like it was having a burnout. So like it's really weird to decontaminate now after he's already stepped off the transporter. But I mean, I guess they did get to it eventually. So back down on the planet, Kirk contacts Scotty, says that he's ready to beam up, and Scotty's like, oh, it's going to be a minute. We got to finish correcting the the transporter. And he says that everything checks out okay now after like 2 seconds. I got to finish this thing, so it could be just a second. It's like literally 2 seconds.
Oh, it's good to go.
Yeah, he just like pressed like 2 or 3 buttons. He's like, nah, it's fine. So he sends the other technician to go get a synchronic meter so he can double check. And like, why wouldn't you double check that before you teleported Kirk up? He's like, no, we're good. We'll double check everything afterwards.
That's what I was kind of thinking also. Like, you just said that you need to check it out. Then you're like, oh, never mind. We'll just beam the captain up.
Yeah, what could possibly go wrong?
Have they not seen this show?
Yeah, like, has he not been there for any of the shit that's happened recently?
Well, you got to replace those dead crewmen.
Yeah, you think they would just be really, really cautious about every single situation. Like, the stupidest little stuff you would think they would be overly cautious about. Like, in their little bit of journey so far, it's been nothing but trouble. And he's like, I'm willing to chance this teleporter or transporter. I'm really trying not to say teleporter because I know it's not. Like, I know it's a transporter and they do the same thing. But right. I feel like we'll catch some flack for that. So he tells Kirk that he's locked on, and then he beams him up. And Kirk beams in, but, he's taken some time to get through as well, same as Fisher did. And then when he gets finished, he kind of stumbles off the transporter pad. And Scotty comes up and, offers to help escort him out of the room. And Kirk's like, no, you shouldn't leave the transporter room unattended, so I'll go. And Scotty's like, it's fine, we'll go. So they leave, and then momentarily, like a moment after they leave, another Captain Kirk appears in the transporter, and he comes in facing the opposite directions, like he's facing the back of the transporter, and then he does like this, incredibly cheesy like evil guy reveal where he turns around and like the camera zooms in and everything's all red and like the lighting gets all dark and they have like the ominous music. So like even if you're just like dumb as hell, like that's an evil version of Kirk.
The crazy eyes really give it away.
Then I realized, like, I went back to read the episode description because I don't read the episode descriptions before I watch the episode, and yeah, it's definitely evil Kirk. So this is where we get the show opening, and we get the captain's log and all that. Stardate 1672.1, and then Kirk just outright says, hey, there's a duplicate of me, some kind of strange alter ego, and it was caused by a transporter malfunction. Duplicate Kirk approaches the transporter terminal, and the other technician comes back and asks if he's okay, and Duplicate Kirk is obviously just a dick, and he just doesn't answer, and he leaves. And I know I'm going to say Duplicate Kirk a lot, so I'm probably just going to call him like DK, not to be confused with Donkey Kong.
If only he had some barrels, he would have been unstoppable.
Yeah. So in the corridor, Scotty recommends to regular Kirk that he gets checked out by Dr. McCoy, and he's like, yeah, I'll go to the sick bay and I'll do that. But instead, he goes to his quarters where Yeoman Rand is waiting to give him some ship manifests, and he just kind of dismisses her and lays down on his bed. And again, it's like, why wouldn't you go to the sick bay? Like, you're not feeling great. You came from a foreign planet. There was trouble with the transporter. Like, this kind of stuff should be like instant sick bay visit. And he's just like, even Kirk has that moment of stupidity. He's like, I'm just going to go lay down. Yeah, especially like considering everything they've gone through so far. Better. But in the sick bay, McCoy is checking out Fisher when Duplicate Kirk walks in and demands some Saurian brandy. So he exists, like he literally exists on this planet or like in this universe for all of like 2 minutes, and he immediately just wants to get drunk.
And apparently you have to go to your doctor to get drunk.
Yeah. Is alcohol like a prescribed thing there? Because he had like an entire cabinet of it.
Well, so far in the show, we haven't seen anyone else drinking like in the quarters. So it makes me wonder if, the doctor can prescribe you a drink.
Yeah, no, we haven't seen anybody drink anywhere. Yeah, that's a good point.
Every time Kirk has gone for a drink, he's gone to see McCoy.
So like on the Enterprise, they have, maybe they have like a beach deck just based on what we saw in like the pilot episode, and they have a bowling alley, but they don't have a bar. I'm pretty sure that from my limited knowledge of the Next Generation, I think that they do have a bar on that Enterprise. Maybe they just like added one later.
Maybe there's some weird Federation law saying that the captain's not allowed to drink. So Dr. McCoy's actually helping him out. Like, hey, I won't tell nobody.
Yeah, and maybe because if you remember, like in the pilot, that the doctor of that ship brought some drinks to Pike when he was in his quarters and had him like hidden away in his little doctor's case. So maybe he's not allowed to. But it's still weird that it's locked away.
Well, you probably got some teenagers on the ship somewhere.
Yeah, just those young, like, well, maybe not teenagers, but like, early 20s that just want to party in a starship. I mean, who wouldn't want to, honestly?
I mean, you go by like a supernova, you're gonna have a drink.
Yeah, and then obviously, duplicate Kirk just exists for like 2 minutes and wants to get drunk, but he's party Kirk now.
That's how that's how they're like trying to portray him being evil. Like, hey, this dude needs to drink right away. Like, he's bad.
Yeah, I don't think that makes him evil. Like, that would just make him some guy I would probably hang out with at a bar every now and then.
Right.
He's like, look, I had a hard day. Like, I just came into existence. I had to step off a teleporter pad or transporter. I need a drink. It's been a rough one. So McCoy dismisses Fisher, who tells duplicate Kirk that his hand feels much better. And, again, he just gets kind of dismissed. And then I was like, oh my God, Fisher didn't die. Like, he was unnamed for the first small section of the episode. Like, he got hurt and he didn't die. So they've already broken the trope of the first few episodes where, like, the unnamed crewmen just perish for some reason.
Look, that would have been pretty sad if he would have died from a hand cut.
Yeah, but I mean, weirder things have happened so far.
I mean, that's true.
So McCoy approaches duplicate Kirk, who grabs him by the back of the neck and demands the brandy. And Bones opens up the case and gives him the brandy, and then, fake Kirk just leaves. But in the corridor, he's just, drinking, hanging out. And he's walking around and finds Janice's room and decides he wants to go in there. So we go back to regular Kirk's room, and Mr. Spock knocks on the door, and he enters the room. And he's like, hey, McCoy sent me here. He just wants me to check up on you. And he said you were acting kind of like a wild man. And Kirk is like, well, is he just playing a joke? And Spock just seems a little suspicious of that. But he ultimately just ends up leaving. No big deal, whatever. Back in the transporter room, Scotty is holding the unicorn dog, or like it. I don't know what else to call it. It's just like it's. I don't want to call it a horn dog, like a horned dog.
It's horn dog. That's what we should call it.
Yeah. I kind of like unicorn dog though because it's got corn dog in there.
Well, we don't want to go down that rabbit hole with me on corn dogs.
Yeah, that's true. Do you think you could eat those small animals? Like, do you think they have enough meat to be good? Like, underneath all that fur?
1.5 men maybe would be able to get some food. Like, you'd probably be hungry in about an hour.
If it's like a starving, like if you're gonna, you're marooned somewhere and you're just gonna starve to death and you happen across like unicorn dog, you could probably get something out of it. I wonder if it's mostly fur, if there's just like a lot of meat under there.
I mean, as cold as the planet gets, you think there'd be more fur than meat.
Yeah, that's true. It's probably like super thin and it's just a whole lot of fur or hair. But Scotty's holding the unicorn dog, and Spock and Kirk into the room, and Scotty tells him about the transporter issue, and he opens this box and shows that there's a really pissed off unicorn dog in there. So, he goes on to explain that it's not a duplicate, so I'm wrong in calling him duplicate Kirk, apparently, but he's an opposite, and like the regular one, or just one of them is real gentle, and the one's like super mean. And he's like, hey, we can't get the rest of the crew back up here because we don't know what's going to happen. Like, we don't want to take the chance of there being duplicates. So Kirk just kind of like immediately recognizes what's going on. Like, he has this kind of, aha thing for like the little bit that's already happened. But this is where I was wondering, okay, so like they're opposites, right? And they say that opposites attract. So could we get like some Kirk on Kirk action going?
He's like, man, you're stunningly handsome. I like how you look.
Yeah, like regular Kirk's like, man, you're so strong and angry. And then the other Kirk's like, you're so, gentle and intelligent. And I feel like that's like there's probably fan fiction of that out there. And for like just a split second there, I was like, I should see if there is. And then I immediately came to my senses. I was like, no, I should not see if there is. I don't think I need that in my life.
You don't want to go down that rabbit hole.
No, I don't need that. So back in Janice's room, she goes inside of her, her room and finds that opposite Kirk is there. And he just immediately starts hitting on her. And he's like, yeah, you're super beautiful and all that. And so, he's been alive for like 5 minutes at this point, and he wants to drink and he wants to have sex. So I was wondering if like this is a callback to maybe like the naked time, like maybe this is the naked time, because there was no naked time there.
That's true. He was pretty upset about that one.
Yeah. So we make a move for naked time, and he grabs her and is like delivers like the most forceful kiss I've ever seen. And obviously she resists and she gets mad and she like throws him on the floor and then he jumps on her, which is kind of like edgy for the 1960s. Like obviously it's meant to be like rapey, but it's like super rapey. I was like, I can't believe they showed this on TV in the 60s.
That's kind of what I was thinking also.
Yeah, like it could have been more violent, but like it was pretty violent, I think, for back then. But she scratches up opposite Kirk's face and manages to get up and run and hide behind an easel. And he chases her. She tries to leave, and he catches her like just as she's trying to get out the door. And good old Fisher is walking by, and Janice yells at him. She's like, "Hey, help! Call Mr. Spock." And so like he runs off to do that, and opposite Kirk chases him out of the room, and then attacks him in the corridors. And I'm like, oh, is this how Fisher goes? Like, I really hope that he doesn't just die, because every random guy just dies.
Well, there when he started pummeling his face, I thought that negative Kirk was going to kill him.
Yeah, I was like, damn, dude, like he's gonna murder him with his bare hands, just like beat him into the floor.
What is he, Batman?
Yeah, I mean, kind of like negative Batman. I don't know,
well, Batman does like to pummel criminals.
Yeah, but like Batman is kind of angry like that. So in Kirk's quarters, Spock is questioning him about the events that Yeoman Rand and McCoy have reported, and Kirk wants to find out what's going on. So he's like, hey, let's go to the sick bay. Let's just go get this worked out now. So the elevator door closes, and opposite Kirk walks by holding his bloody hand that he used to just beat the hell out of Fisher. And here I'm like, man, did Fisher die? Like, is our dead count up to 18 now?
And what a kill that would have been.
Yeah, like, would that have been the first barehanded kill?
I believe so.
Like just getting pummeled like that?
Not a way that you'd want to go.
Yeah. But opposite Kirk goes into regular Kirk's quarters, and he lays down on his bed and starts like nursing his hand, and he put his bloody hand in his mouth. Did you see that?
I did.
He started like sucking on the bloody hand.
I wonder if he was trying to like if it was like a pacifying behavior.
Right. Yeah, I don't think he was like intentionally trying to get the blood off his hand, but that's still disgusting. that's probably Fisher's blood, right? And he's just drinking
maybe
it?
A little bit of Fisher's and a little bit of his own. Maybe he's like, I need my iron.
Yeah. So in the sick bay, Janice is explaining the events from earlier to Kirk and Spock and McCoy. She mentions scratching Kirk's face, and he's like, hey, but look at my face. I don't have any scratches on me or anything. And she mentions that Fisher, saw Kirk there. And then Fisher like pops up in the door all beat up and like bruised up. And he's like, yeah, that was definitely Kirk that did it. So, hey, we still only have 17 dead.
Also, I'd like to point out, I thought that scene was very well acted.
Yeah.
With her not wanting to look at him, even though I think logically she knew he didn't do it. It's still, and her brain was like, no, it looked like you. So I don't want to, see you right now.
Yeah. She was pretty sure, that it was him. And then like she starts to doubt herself with the whole, when he talks about the scratches thing. Yeah, she did. It was really, really well done. So Spock dismisses Janice, and he tells Kirk that, hey, the only logical answer here is that there's an imposter on board. And it's like, why is that the only logical answer? Like, absolutely ridiculous. Like, it's not logical, that Kirk, was having a bad day and got drunk and tried to rape his yeoman, and that, she thought she scratched him, but really didn't. Like, the only logical thing is, like, there has to be an imposter on board.
None of those mind bending space aliens that we've encountered before. It has to be an imposter.
Yeah. So we get the commercial break section, and we come back to another captain's log, stardate 1672.9, and they say that the temperature on the planet's surface is beginning to drop, and that the crew is in great danger there. Kirk and Scotty are talking in the transporter room about, the yellow ore that Fisher had on him and how it might be the cause of the transporter trouble. And Kirk expresses, his concern for his crew members still trapped on the planet, and, hey, the temperature's dropping. Can we try to get this thing fixed? So he tells Spock to organize search parties to find, the opposite version of him. And Spock, brings up the point where he's like, well, maybe we shouldn't kill that guy. We just need to capture him because we don't know if that would do something to you. And Kirk's like, yeah, that's a good point. So we should just put our phasers on locked on setting 1.
They obviously can't teleport or beam the crew members up. Why can't they take the Enterprise down there to get them? Or do they not have like another spacecraft in the Enterprise where you can go pick up a party if your beamer's down.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Like I didn't think about that. We know that like in the last episode, when they were getting really close to that planet, that the Enterprise withheld an incredible temperature. So we know that it would be okay with re-entering an atmosphere, at least as far as heat concerned, but maybe it's more like a pressure thing. And since it's a spaceship, it's not really meant for, the forces of gravity and stuff like that. Like maybe it would come apart.
Well, that's what I was wondering. Do they have anti-gravity technology at this point?
Yeah, that's a really good question.
Because obviously in space you don't have to worry about that, but I just found it hard to believe that it couldn't go down in the atmosphere and, pick them up.
Right, or at the very least, like you said, have some sort of landing craft, because that is a huge ship, and you would think that it would have its own hangar for, like, specifically stuff like that. Like, they can't use the teleporter or the transporter to get everywhere, right?
Well, you wouldn't think so, and you wouldn't want to rely on just one thing, just in case, in this instance, something happens.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I didn't think about that at all. So, Kirk stresses that he really doesn't want opposite Kirk to be harmed or killed. And he seems like he's kind of having trouble focusing here. So he says he'll make an announcement to the crew and tell them what's going on. And Spock is like, no, you definitely shouldn't do that, because then, you'll appear vulnerable to the crew. And you can't really afford the luxury of being anything less than perfect, or like the crew's going to lose faith in your command. And for once, like for the first time in this series, I do not agree with Spock here.
I did not either.
I think like the captain has to be vulnerable at times, right? Like just that the pressure of being perfect all the time would like eventually just make it would just be unbearable. Like you would eventually just kind of break, right? Like kind of like how Pike was doing, and he was just over being a captain. And the thing is, like this situation isn't even Kirk's fault. It's not like he made some mistake and now suddenly there's two of him. It was a malfunctioning piece of equipment, and I feel like his crew would be like, yeah, hey, it happens. We've dealt with weirder.
Right. There's nothing wrong with, looking human, knowing that, you're not perfect. I think people respect someone in a position of, leadership like that when you are vulnerable.
Like, what an intense amount of pressure to put on a guy who already has to worry about, like, a potentially evil version of himself roaming around his ship. And now Spock's like, well, you're not allowed to ever make any mistakes.
Yeah, I'm with you. I couldn't agree with Spock on this one.
Yeah, so Kirk, though, he's like, yeah, I know that, and I don't know why I just forgot about that. And he goes to leave, and he turns around and tells Spock, he's like, if you see me slipping up again, you got to let me know. So then we get another captain's log, stardate 1673.1, and Kirk is narrating and explains that when he was duplicated, he lost his strength of will, and that it's becoming more and more difficult for him to make decisions. So Kirk does actually end up making an announcement to the entire ship about the imposter, and he tells them, hey, this guy's got scratches on his face, and you can tell, that's how it's not me. And Spock interrupts him to remind him to tell the crew to set their phasers on stun, and he's like, oh yeah, it's probably a good idea. We don't want him to like murder, potentially murder angry me.
I almost forgot to tell you guys, don't kill the imposter.
Yeah, don't like vaporize the guy. We want to capture him. It's just a minor detail, But would they immediately just like, if they weren't told that, would the crew just immediately be like, hell yeah, like it's Kirk hunting time, and just like set their phasers to the highest setting? Like I've been waiting for this to happen.
I've always
forever.
wanted to shoot the captain.
Yeah. It's they could shoot the captain and be praised by the captain at the same time.
I've been waiting for this day forever.
Yeah. So while that's happening, opposite Kirk is shown like being just super mad because he's like, I'm the real captain. I'm, and he's just like wrecking stuff. But what if he is the real captain, and the one that Spock is with is the fake Kirk? Like, is either one of them really real at this point?
Well, they kind of come to that conclusion a little bit later on, knowing that, or realizing that they need each other. But that's jumping ahead.
Yeah, they're both kind of the real one, and they're both kind of the fake one. But he goes to a mirror, and he finds some makeup, and he uses it to cover his face scratches. And then he opens a door, and the transporter technician Wilson's walking by, and he's like, hey, come over here, give me your phaser. And Wilson's just like, yeah, sure, that's not weird at all that you don't have one. So he hands it over, and opposite Kirk just knocks him out.
Which was kind of uncalled for.
Yeah, 'cause, like the dude gave you what you wanted. You didn't have to be like an absolute dick about it.
He didn't question it one bit. He's like, here you go, boss.
Yeah, see, like when a nice guy too. He's like, oh yeah, it's weird, but I'm not gonna question it. Here's my gun. But opposite Kirk called him by name, so I was like, wait, does that mean that he has all of the knowledge that regular Kirk has? Which we find out later that he does. So on the planet, Kirk is in contact with Sulu, and he's like, hey, it's already 20 below, and it's getting pretty cold down here. And Kirk just hangs up on him, like doesn't even acknowledge that he was having a conversation. He's just like, all right, just hangs
He's
up.
like, cool story, bro.
Yeah, he didn't even respond to him. Like Sulu's like, hey, we're about to freeze to death, and he's like, click. So Spock says that they transported some thermo heaters to the planet, but they duplicated and they won't work. And then he gets a call from a guy who is explaining what happened to Wilson with the whole phaser thing. But I imagine that's like, what a goofy scenario. You can just like start sending things down to a planet and it just like starts doubling up, but it just never works. Like none of the things ever work. Like, so could you send like a blanket down there? And then you just have two blankets because they don't really have like a function beyond just existing. There's no like electronics or anything in them.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Like, could you send like some food and stuff down there and now you just have more food? Or would it just like one of them tastes pretty good and the other one tastes terrible? Which, I mean, either way, you still have at least one good tasting one.
Right. One actually fills you up. The other one's just like empty calories.
Which, I mean, I guess wouldn't be a bad thing because you'd still, use the calories for energy. But Spock and Kirk talk about how the opposite Kirk has all of Kirk's knowledge. So it turns out he does know everything. And Spock suggests that maybe we can use that to, guess his next move. He asks regular Kirk where he would go to avoid a mass search. And Kirk's like, oh, I'd go down to the lower levels to the engineering deck, which is a pretty solid plan to use his own knowledge against him. But also, I've been watching the Lower Decks animated show, and that's kind of what that entire show is about. It's how nobody really goes down to the lower decks, and they're just kind of pretty much on their own. So they kind of, I guess, reinforce that here, that, yeah, lower decks, like, you can hide there because nobody ever goes there.
You would imagine, though, someone on the lower decks would be like, hey, why is the captain down here, though?
Yeah, that would be like a really weird event for them to see, like, part of the bridge crew down there, especially being the captain. So they do enter the engineering deck and they set their phasers to stun, and Spock suggests that, hey, maybe we should get some help with this. And Kirk is like, no, I don't want anybody to see like opposite me, which is weird because he already made the announcement. But and plus it would just look like him with scratches. But while they're talking about that, opposite Kirk's climbing on some equipment above him, and then they kind of split up and he drops down and goes off after regular Kirk, and they have this kind of standoff. So Kirk tells, like, the fake one, he's like, well, we can't hurt each other because we need each other. And the fake one's like, well, I don't really need you. And then Spock comes up behind him and does the whole Vulcan grip thing just as he fires a shot and misses and hits a panel and just like wrecks the panel. So that's the second time, like back-to-back episodes, we get the Vulcan grip thing.
Which is pretty great.
Yeah, like super effective. Does that work from the front as well? Like, can you just grab somebody? Do you always have to be behind them?
I was wondering if it wasn't like a pressure point that he's hitting that's knocking him out, or is it just his overwhelming strengths that when he, grips on you, you're like, oh, the pain's so unbearable, I'm just going to pass out.
Yeah, I think it's probably a pressure point thing. But like I said, like, can you grab that from the front? Like, does your thumb have to be in a specific position in the back that maybe your fingers aren't strong enough to get to that? I don't know. I bet we see eventually. I want to see a time where he does that and it doesn't do anything, and then he's like super surprised. I hope we get that eventually.
He'd be like, oh man, this person's really strong.
Yeah. So in the med bay or sick bay, McCoy recommends binding the opposite Kirk instead of sedating him because he doesn't know how he's going to handle, being sedated. And regular Kirk's having some trouble deciding what to do. And Spock is like, hey, you're rapidly losing your power of decision here. And he suggests that, since they have the opportunity to study the way that people work, with him being split, and, we should definitely check that out. And he's like, well, maybe the evil side is what makes Kirk strong. And he's like, without your evil side, you are probably not going to be able to function as a captain because, it's where you got, your strength from and your ability to make decisions. And McCoy says that, Kirk can fight it with his intellect, And Kirk's like, well, I don't know about that. So Scotty calls Kirk to inform him of the new trouble with the transporter, and it turns out the panel that the opposite dude accidentally shot was pretty necessary for the transporter. So he burned through some wires and just kind of messed everything up, and the transporter is even more screwed now.
Didn't it say it would take a week to fix it?
Yeah, said it was going to take them. They wouldn't be able to fix it in less than a week,
which is pretty bad.
Yeah, that's I wonder what kind of parts they keep on hand in case of such an emergency. You can't imagine that your phaser or your teleporter wires are going to get shot with a phaser, but at the same time, I would think you have to plan for things like that.
Right.
But on the planet, Sulu is in contact with Kirk, and he's like, "Hey, it's 41 below now," and Kirk's like, "Hey, we found the problem. We're going to have it repaired pretty soon," and Sulu is pretty jokingly asking, "Hey, maybe you can find a really long rope somewhere and lower us down some hot coffee." And Kirk is not, he's trying to joke along with him. He's like, well, we'll see what we can do. And Sulu's like, well, you can send rice wine if you don't have any coffee. And Sulu is taking that, this whole situation very well. He's just been joking the entire time.
Which, if I was in his position, I would not be joking. I'd be pretty pissed.
Oh, absolutely. I would be probably, first of all, incredibly afraid that I was going to die, and then that would manifest itself into anger. I would just be super pissed about it. Just bring the whole damn ship down here and get me.
Yeah, because at this point, aren't they at negative 40 or something around there?
Yeah, negative 41 was what he had reported.
That's cold.
And then again, though, Kirk hangs up on him. He's like, yeah, if you don't have any coffee, you can send me some rice wine. And he's just like, click. Dude, you got to learn, I'll get back with you. Okay, talk to you later. Love you. Bye. He just hangs up on him.
Well, this is the future. They do things a little differently in the future.
Yeah, it's just conversation over. Click. So Kirk calls on Scotty to ask for a status report, and that's when he says, that they're not going to be able to have it repaired in less than a week. And then they go to commercial, come back to another captain's log, which is going to happen a lot, probably every time they go to a commercial. So I don't know how long I'm going to keep up the whole Stardate thing. I'll just stop right now because it doesn't really seem important. It's nice to kind of track how much time has passed, but oftentimes I just end up forgetting anyway and assume that all of this is happening within the span of a few hours.
Right.
Yeah, and most of the time it's just like this one. It's just Kirk is just recapping what's going on. He doesn't often offer up a lot of new information. But he does actually, in this one, say that the planet is now down to 75 below. And I looked it up, and they would have been dead a long time before this happened. Because apparently at 40 below, frostbite takes less than 10 minutes to set in. And at 70 below, with wind chill, your skin can actually freeze in about 30 seconds. So they are, 5 degrees beyond that happening already. So
and I'm pretty sure heating up those rocks won't help that much.
Yeah, so that's what we have happening right now is Sulu uses his phaser to heat up some rocks, and then the crew gathers around him for heat, and he jokes that, hey, we should call room service because that coffee has taken a pretty long time, which that's actually a really good idea, using his phaser like that. It's interesting, though, that if you remember in the pilot with the hidden elevator, they were using their phasers to shoot those rocks to try to destroy them. So does a lower setting not destroy them and just heat stuff up? Do you think that's how that worked?
That's what I was assuming, but I was also thinking if you're able to find a side of a mountain, blow a hole in the mountain and try to get in there to get out of the cold at least. Or at least get out of the wind.
Right. Yeah, that's a good idea too. And even the areas they were around, they probably could have, because there were some, not mountains, but some hills they probably could have blasted a hole into the side of just to get out of the wind and then maybe heat something up in there.
Like I said, where the animals going on the planet when it gets that cold? You'd think, like you said, you'd be going underground.
Right. And they're just up there heating up some rocks. But Sulu does call Kirk, and he makes a few jokes about the cold again, and asks how long until they're going to be brought back. And then Spock gets on the line and interrupts and tells him, hey, you got to hold on a little longer. And Sulu makes mention of, they're putting to use the training that Spock had shown them, the survival guide. So I guess that's how they learned how to heat up the whole rock thing. And like maybe this has happened before because they have an entire section on it in their survival guide. So, in case you ever get stuck on a frozen planet and you've got your phaser, heat some rocks. So opposite Kirk wakes up kind of like screaming in the sick bay, and regular Kirk goes in to ask him what's going on. And McCoy's like, well, he's dying and his body is failing due to the duplication process, which you would think that would be happening to regular Kirk at this time, but it's not. Regular Kirk goes over and like holds, opposite Kirk's hand and tells him to like hold on. And he's like, you got to use your mind and you got to think about it. And then he starts to stabilize and then just passes out. So McCoy's like, hey, this is a good time to get a drink, and leaves. And as he, after he leaves, Kirk talks about how, he's just kind of talking to himself. He goes, yeah, I got to get this one, back inside. Like we have to merge back into one being. McCoy comes back with his drink, and he talks about how, everybody's got a good side and a bad side. And, that's a really necessary thing, and it's what makes us human. So we get our kind of, philosophical part of the episode here.
Which I enjoyed.
Yeah, it's not like cheesy in any way. It's just kind of standard drama stuff. But they always seem to have like really good dialogue when it comes to these moments.
Yeah, I just enjoyed it because basically it's saying, hey, the sums of all your good and bad of you makes you you.
Right. So Spock calls to tell regular Kirk that he needs him to come to the transporter room and they might have found a solution. But as Kirk leaves, the opposite one is laying on the bed and he starts smiling because he just kind of overheard everything that Bones and Kirk had said. But back in the transporter room, Spock explains that they found a way to tie the transporter directly into the impulse engines to make it work again. So he suggests that they test it with the unicorn dog thing. And Scotty's like, hell yeah, animal experimentation, and goes over and just grabs, the animal, and Spock just knocks it out. They don't show him knocking it out. Do you think he just like punch the thing in the face, or do the Vulcan thing on it?
The Vulcan grip for sure.
Yeah, he just reaches down, and it's just like, all right. So they put both of them on the transporter and fire it up, which then I'm wondering, like, if this didn't work, okay, and they just ended up transporting both of them down to the planet, then that crew down there gets one happy dog and one super pissed off dog, and they're freezing. So they just, or like, what if it split them even further? So then you get like the evil one had all of its evil taken out, so you have like one more evil one and maybe one less evil one, or one slightly evil one, or slightly
what
less
is this,
evil
Majin Buu?
Yeah, it's just little boos everywhere. But yeah, they would just have just a pissed off dog down there while they're freezing, and probably at that point they would be like, screw this, and just shoot it and eat it. Yeah, if you can heat up rocks with the phaser, you could probably cook meat, right?
Oh, you just throw that dog on those rocks and, you'd have a gourmet meal.
Yeah, absolutely. So the animal comes back in the transporter, though, and it's one animal, but it is dead. And this is where Bones is like, he's dead, Jim. And is that where like that meme came from? Because I've seen that in like a million different places, and I wonder if this is the episode. Because if so, like if that entire meme has been about him announcing that, this dog unicorn thing is dead, then I would have thought that it was something more prominent than that.
I do not know that meme.
No? Oh yeah, it's a big.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever seen that meme.
Yeah, well, maybe it's not a big one, but it does pop up from time to time. Even in like Star Trek related areas, because obviously, before this I didn't hang out in those areas, so I've seen it. But we go to the commercial, come back, and actually Spock is giving a captain's log, and he's just explaining the current situation again, so he's just kind of taking over for Kirk. And Bones is ordering an autopsy of the animal, and he says, hey, it might have just died of shock, but we want to make sure. Spock's like, yeah, that's a pretty good idea. That dog probably would have been in a lot of terror, and that could have been what killed the animal. And he's like, if we did this with Kirk, though, he wouldn't be scared. He would understand what's going on, so maybe the shock wouldn't kill him. And Kirk agrees with McCoy that they need to do the autopsy and double check the transporter circuits. And Spock reminds him, hey, you got crew on the planet that's freezing to death, because he had forgotten all about that.
Well, he's hung up on him a couple times, so I don't think he cares.
Yeah, he's really just trying to use this as a situation to get rid of Sulu.
He's like, no one's died yet from this episode.
Yeah. He's like, first of all, nobody's died in a really long time. And second of all, I just really don't like Sulu. So this is a great way to get rid of him.
He's always making those jokes about wanting his rice wine.
It's like you could get your rice wine in hell. So Kirk, he agrees to the transporter thing, and McCoy's, tells him it's not a good idea. He's like, that could kill you, and if that happens, the crew's just gonna end up dying anyway, so it'd all be pointless. And Spock is arguing about, he's like, I've got experience with this kind of thing because I have a human side and a Vulcan side, and they're constantly at war with each other. But, my intelligence wins out over both of them. And, I think that would be the situation with Kirk, too. And I think that that's just absolute garbage. Like, Kirk was literally split into two people. Spock was just born with, like, half human, half Vulcan. Like, it is not a similar situation at all.
Agreed.
Yeah, like, if you would split Spock, like one would be human and one would be Vulcan, then it's a similar situation. But like just being like a mixed race is not the same as being literally split into two.
Right. I thought Spock should have argued the point that Kirk was going to die either way, possibly. Like, hey, you're obviously dying being split from your other self. Or you might die if we try to put you together. So you're not really losing anything. You're just taking a gamble.
Yeah. You might as well chance it. Like, Spock has been so off on this episode. Like, up to this point, I've been 100% with him all the way. And then he's not there anymore. Like, he's just been, I think, wrong on everything. Like,
maybe,
I don't know why. This one...
From last episode, when he got his emotions messed with, has put him in a different state of mind.
Yeah, I don't know, because like he's been so off, and for some reason this one especially just kind of pissed me off because he's like, oh, this, I go through this every day. Oh, you go through being split in two every day? Like, that's a terrible existence. Also, you should know how to fix it by now. Then,
right?
Like I get the comparison he was making, but it's not the same. It's just not. But Kirk is like, hey, I can't really make this decision. I need one of you guys to decide for me. And McCoy tells him, that you have to do this yourself. So Kirk's like, all right, Spock, you go right to the transporter room, and McCoy, you just do your autopsy anyway. So Kirk goes back to the sick bay, and Uhura calls him to put him on with Sulu. And Sulu's like, hey, it's 117 below zero here, and we're probably not going to make it much longer. And then Kirk just loses contact with them, I'm assuming because of like the cold. I think they had like communications issues.
Well, at that point, your electronics are probably somehow freezing.
Yeah, and really it just saved Kirk the trouble of having to hang up on him. He's like, I wasn't going to answer. I was going to hang up anyway. And then they got cut off. And he's like, oh, thank God. I'm so sick of talking to him.
Who's this? New phone.
Yeah, new communicator. Who dis? So opposite Kirk asks, hey, what are you gonna do? And Kirk's like, hey, we're gonna go through the transporter. And he draws his phaser and then unties opposite guy. And opposite Kirk is like, yeah, I'm not gonna fight you anymore. I'm feeling pretty weak. And he's just kind of, standing there, not looking great. So he stands up, but he falls down into Kirk's arm, and Kirk catches him. And then opposite Kirk just starts punching regular Kirk in the stomach. Like, I feel like he should have seen that one coming. But he slams Kirk's head into the door, making him drop his phaser, and then opposite guy grabs it and hits Kirk with it, and then he just takes off. So in the corridor, we see opposite Kirk, who is now dressed as the real Kirk. And I'm like, where the hell did he get that uniform? Like, did he steal it off of him? Like, he just strip him down and take his clothes? Because before, the opposite one was wearing the gold uniform, and regular one was wearing green, which I guess now that I think about it is also kind of weird, because why the hell would that happen when they split? Wouldn't they be wearing the same thing?
Unless regular Kirk had changed shirts at some point in the episode.
Oh, you know what? I think you're right. I think he was wearing his regular uniform down on the planet, and then maybe when he went to his room, he changed. I think you're right. Okay, that makes much more sense now. I was like, wait a minute. Why the hell are they dressed differently? But yeah, so he's dressed as the real Kirk, and he runs into Janice, and he apologizes to her, and he kind of explains, hey, there was an evil clone of me, which is actually him. There was an imposter going around, and he even scratched himself to make himself look more like me. And he offers to go to her cabin later to explain a little more, which Like, he's still trying. Like, good for him. So then he goes to the bridge. On the bridge, also, he was far less rapey this time, which is definitely a step in the right direction. But
He
I
didn't
feel
have
like
the
he would be
energy
much
for
more
it.
rapey later. Yeah, he's had a long day. He already got drunk, tried to rape her once.
And he beat himself up.
Yeah, so on the bridge, he just gives the helmsman the order to leave the planet and says, hey, crew on the planet can't be saved. See you later, suckers. And he tells Spock that he changed his mind about the transporter. And then that's when the real Kirk and Dr. McCoy enter the bridge. And opposite Kirk orders the crew to grab him. He's like, hey, that's a fake one. Get that guy. And he tries to convince Spock and that the real Kirk is the imposter. And Spock's just like, you know what? I'm staying out of this. Like, you two figure this shit out. I'm really over this. So opposite Kirk threatens to shoot the real one, and the real one's like, well, if you do that, we're both gonna die, which is unproven at this point. And the opposite one kind of starts to break down, and Kirk slowly reaches out and takes the phaser from him, and the fake one starts like pleading that he doesn't want to go back in the same body. He really wants to stay separate. So Kirk gives him a nice hug, and they take him to the transporter room. And I thought that both sides, like both Kirks, it was really well acted. Like, it was a really good scene. I actually, so far, I've really liked opposite Kirk, Shatner. Like, he's been super solid, portraying a completely different but the same role.
Right.
So Spock fires up the transporter, and the two Kirks disappear, and they have some trouble getting him back. And Spock, does some stuff with the panel, gets him brought back. Kirk steps off the transporter and then orders them to get the crew back off the planet immediately. So they transport all those guys back, and McCoy's like, hey, aside from some frostbite, they're all going to be fine. And then we go back to the bridge, and Kirk, thanks Spock for his help. And Yeoman Rand comes up, and starts to explain her run-in with the imposter one. And, she's kind of stumbling over words a little bit because you can tell she has a thing for Kirk. And Kirk just thanks her and then walks away. So she goes over to Spock, who mentions, that the imposter had some interesting qualities, so he's kind of like, you really like that version of Kirk, huh? And then the episode ends with the Enterprise going on to its next adventure. So what do you think about this one, Dan?
Overall, I really enjoyed the episode. I thought it was pretty solid. Like I said earlier in the episode, though, my only question was, why can't the Enterprise somehow go down there and get the crew? But other than that, I thought it was a pretty solid episode.
Yeah, I'm right there with you on this one. It's good, again, to be away from brain stuff. It's completely different than the virus thing. A lot of really good acting. I've seen some people complain that Shatner overacted throughout this series, and I don't know, like, maybe he gets that way in the later episodes or later seasons, but I just have not seen that. Like, I've seen a lot of just really good work from Shatner, and this is another one that, like I said, he was really good as like the opposite version of himself and portraying them both differently so that you could easily tell which one was which. And yeah, I really enjoyed this episode. Like a different problem brought about in a pretty interesting way. The stakes didn't seem as high as they normally do. Like, so what? Your captain dies and, a few more crewmen die. You've already lost 17 at this point. Like, what's another, like, 4?
Right.
But overall, yeah, I thought it was a really good episode. And I'm still excited just to see what other problems they come up with for this crew. Yeah, that's pretty much it for me. Do you have anything else?
Nope, I think you summed it up pretty good.
Okay, so the next episode that we're going to watch is going to be Season 1, Episode 6, called Mud's Women, and that's an interesting title. Again, I'm not looking at the description, so I'm going to be completely surprised by this. But if anybody wants to, talk about the show or the podcast, you can get us on Twitter at WWST_podcast. You can email us questions, comments, wwstpod@gmail.com. You can check out our podcast pretty much anywhere you find your podcasts, including on YouTube. So if you're listening on like Spotify or something and you'd rather be on YouTube, we're on there as well. And I think that's going to do it for me.
Later, guys.